The frost is settling, and so should you, with a comforting meal that brings back the warmest memories of childhood. Think bubbling casseroles, steaming soups, and the kind of meals that had us fighting over the last spoonful at the table. Grab your favorite blanket and settle in. You won't want to miss these 2 hours of comfort classics. Firstly, fine dining and delectable foods are the perfect themes to start our list. And there is no better dish to represent that than chicken divan. Chicken casseroles stuffed with broccoli, cheese, and a special sauce. Not just any sauce from down the alley, this was the signature taste of the Divan Parisian restaurant, which actually invented chicken divans in New York City around the early 20s. Hence the association with fine dining, and its price matched its aesthetic. Like seriously, this thing cost you $1 and then some back then. Naturally though, everyone could not spread their bank account, so do-it-yourself, cheaper alternatives of the dish came around. For those who could get it, they would gladly shill out their wallets for something so divine though, and that is the saddest part of it all. You could not find an authentic chicken divan anywhere if you tried even in a home chef's kitchen. In contrast, green bean casserole is a dish that reminds you of home. Bean casserole with mushroom soup that reminds you of afternoons spent driving to your aunt's or your vegan uncle who claims he makes an allegedly good one. Historically, the soup was something that America went more towards in the 80s and 90s. Remember our past videos had things like deep-fried cheese balls and whatnot? Yeah, that just could not last, and being honest, nobody expected it to. Definitely a you-had-to-be-there moment that would be overshadowed by people wanting to eat healthier. Probably to make up for past dietary sins, these people came to worship easy recipes like the green bean casserole. Sadly, nowadays, people prefer much more vibrant-tasting soups that do not make them feel like they are only eating it for the health benefits. Amy's Organic Lentil Vegetable Soup was a crowd-pleaser for those who loved a hearty vegetable-packed soup. What's not to love about a healthy soup that tastes just as good? With its blend of lentils and a variety of vegetables, this soup was both filling and nutritious. Amy's has always been a champion of organic and wholesome ingredients, and this soup was no different. It catered to health-conscious consumers who wanted a quick, easy meal without compromising on quality. The canned aisle didn't have many healthy options back then, so this lentil vegetable soup was all the rage. Speaking of vegetable soups, the Trader Joe's sweet potato bisque was a creamy, sweet treat that was beloved by many. This soup featured a rich, velvety texture with the natural sweetness of sweet potatoes. It was a great option for those looking for something a little different from the usual savory soups. Trader Joe's is known for its unique and seasonal products, and this sweet potato bisque was a standout for its flavor and quality. This one often made a grand appearance in the fall when sweet potatoes were in their prime. Unfortunately, it was a limited-time offering and has since been discontinued, but with the rise of easy, quick Trader Joe meals, I can see this one making a comeback to the soup aisle soon. Scalloped potatoes, on the other hand, were a type of fusion food, if you could call it that, which people gladly welcomed with open arms. Thinly sliced potatoes that were put in a casserole dish and baked with cream or milk till the potatoes hit just the right amount of softness. End results were quite impressive as well, with people later adding cheese and fried onions to make various different fun ideas on the dish. As far as happy foods go, it may have left out the more filling and savory aspects of a standard casserole, but it was unmatched in terms of taste. Many movie marathons have been sustained purely on scalloped potatoes and some hot wings or potato wedges. People truly love this simple yet sweet dish, which seemed to give them a childish sense of glee. Lots of folk tend to find new favorite foods pretty fast though, and old ones like scalloped potatoes become history book pages. But the thing that always kept them and others coming was creamed spinach. This became popular as a side being served at many steakhouses around the United States. It's pretty traditional to have some kind of vegetable-oriented side dish served alongside a steak, but it never really had enough steam behind it in terms of demand to warrant creamed spinach being its own standalone food experience. That is, until the dining landscape started violently changing throughout the 1970s. We just talked about how health consciousness became the new idea that was in the topic of the week for the American public, and how suddenly everyone wanted to listen to experimental studies and research that was in its early stages but would end up being true later on. Talking about those of you that think gut health is a hoax, please eat a salad. Anyway, even better than a salad, and just as easy to make in your own home kitchen, creamed spinach was a very palatable and comfortable way to get introduced to vegetables as a source of fulfillment and not just a side dish. It was a rich, creamy dish that got a lot of use at family gatherings and as a weekly lunch. If you've never been catfished by food, when you think of timeless grandma recipes, old-fashioned apple pie is the first thing that comes to mind. Grandma's apple pie was the stuff of legends, with apples sourced from the local orchard and a recipe that's been passed down through generations. This sweet treat dates back to the early settlers in America, who brought with them the tradition of pie making. Grandma's version was often made with a lattice crust and seasoned with cinnamon and nutmeg, making it a comforting treat during the fall and holiday seasons. The secret to a great apple pie is the perfect blend of sweet and tart apples. Granny Smith apples are a popular choice for their tartness, but you can use your favorite variety. The spices, such as cinnamon and nutmeg, add depth of flavor. Now, most of us just go through the McDonald's drive-thru when we're craving apple pie, but let's be honest, the Mickey D's pie has gotten nothing on what sweet old grandma used to make in the kitchen. There really is nothing like a grilled cheese sandwich, a meal that you have seen in the media, in kitchens, all over neighborhoods, in stalls and diners, and just about everywhere else. Sometimes you are in too much of a rush to make anything proper, or you just might only have some cheese and bread on hand. Everyone still needs to eat, but does that mean we have to wash down something we do not even like the taste of? No! And the popularity of grilled cheese sandwiches is a testament to that. But how did these sandwiches get so popular? Well, most Americans can only remember them as a loving meal that their grandmother would make in times exactly like what we described. The best part is that regardless of what kind of bread or cheese you like, every combo works just as well, which is something we cannot say about many dishes. Classic deviled eggs are a timeless favorite that's been gracing party tables for decades, but the 70s was when this appetizer truly shined. Deviled eggs have a long history that dates back to ancient Rome, where they were served as a delicacy at feasts. The term deviled originally referred to dishes that were seasoned with spicy or hot ingredients. What makes deviled eggs so special is their perfect balance of flavors and textures. They're incredibly easy to prepare and can be customized with additions like pickle relish or hot sauce for an extra kick. In the 1970s, deviled eggs were the star of any gathering, from elegant dinner parties to casual get-togethers. Despite the changing food trends, deviled eggs continues to be a beloved classic, evoking nostalgia for simpler times and always adding a touch of retro charm to any event. This list wouldn't be complete without Grandma's baking powder biscuits. There's nothing quite like the smell of freshly baked biscuits, and Grandma's baking powder biscuits were better than those from any bakery. They were fluffy and buttery and disappeared in seconds. And since they were made with baking powder, these biscuits were a quick and easy way to get fresh homemade bread on the table. This cookie was more than grandmas making something good out of the top of their heads. It was science. Buttermilk was the secret ingredient for tender biscuits. It reacted with the baking powder to create air pockets, giving the biscuits their rise. The recipe for these biscuits likely dates back to the late 19th century when baking powder became widely available and revolutionized home baking. These ones were best served with some homemade jam straight from Grandma's fridge. Ah, don't we all miss it? Another wonderful appetizer was broiled Parmesan tomatoes, which were ready in about half an hour and were the ideal sidekick for some boiled or fluffy eggs alongside biscuits. Fresh, ripe summer tomatoes, filled with concentrated flavor, topped with an olive oil spray and kosher salt, sound like a really good time, not to mention the main selling point. The Parmesan cheese added so much flavor and style to this that it became a trending option in the mid-90s and was a frequent sight in many cookbooks in the States, especially those aimed at housewives and home chefs. Many of Grandma's broiled Parmesan tomato recipes are available online, showing how they have stood the test of time and continue to be passed down within families. Basic pimiento cheese, the Southern classic that made its way into the hearts of many during the 70s. This creamy cheese spread was made with shredded cheddar cheese, mayonnaise, and pimientos, giving it a rich, tangy flavor. It was often served as a dip with crackers, spread on sandwiches, or even used as a filling for celery sticks. Basic pimiento cheese has a charming southern origin, with its roots tracing back to the early 20th century in the United States. The spread became popular as a versatile and inexpensive appetizer or sandwich filling, reflecting the Southern tradition of making the most out of simple ingredients. Its name comes from pimiento, a type of sweet pepper that adds a distinctive flavor and vibrant color to the cheese. Today, pimiento cheese is still enjoyed, but it's not as ubiquitous as it once was. However, its creamy, cheesy goodness remains a nostalgic favorite for many. Grandma's cherry salad is a hard one to forget. This recipe might sound unusual, but trust me, it was a classic. This wasn't your average salad. It was a million times better and a hit at the kids' table. Think of a creamy concoction featuring canned cherries, marshmallows, and a dreamy, fluffy dressing. What's not to love? It was the kind of dish that was as much about the fun of eating it as it was about the taste. It especially made waves in states like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Ohio, where cherry orchards were abundant. Cherry salad was a popular choice for potlucks and family gatherings in the mid-20th century. It came along with the trend of adding fruit to salads, making them more of a dessert-like treat. This salad was the ultimate crowd pleaser that always had everyone coming back for seconds. It's a dish that has mostly disappeared from modern menus, but still brings a smile to those who remember it. Okay, so the beloved party pies. These mini savory pies were a staple at 1970s gatherings, offering a variety of fillings like minced meat, chicken, or even vegetables. Encased in a buttery, flaky crust, party pies were the perfect handheld snack, easy to eat while mingling. This variant of the standard meat pie is considered iconic. It was described by New South Wales Premier Bob Carr in 2003 as Australia's national dish. New Zealanders regard the meat pie as a part of New Zealand cuisine, and it forms part of the New Zealand national identity. They were often served hot, straight from the oven, making them an irresistible treat. Whether you preferred a classic beef pie or a creamy chicken and mushroom, there was a party pie to suit every taste. Today, they've been somewhat overshadowed by other finger foods, but their deliciousness and versatility make them a nostalgic favorite. So, why not whip up a batch and bring a bit of 1970s flair to your next gathering? Remember when we said that there are salads that use spinaches and kale? Welcome to the wedge salad, which uses spinach, lettuce, and kale with a blue cheese dressing to make one of the most impeccable salads you have ever had. If a home cook ever wanted to stun the crowd at a summer party or a Thanksgiving lunch, this wedge salad was the go-to option for stealing the show. Plus, the best part was that it was ready in just about 15 minutes. For the finish, you would sprinkle tomatoes, onion, and bacon on each part of the salad to add a delightful and much-needed crunch to go along with the greens. Would you try this? It certainly meets a lot of health needs that people have. The Hamburger Helper casserole takes the flashiness factor and ups it to a 10 unlike corn pudding. Blurring the lines between a casserole and lasagna, this dish also blurred the lines between a simple Tuesday baking session and a literal gift of God. Consisting of pasta, hamburger patties, and a cheesy sauce layered on top, this mixture was then baked into a casserole. As you kept getting deeper into the behemoth, the more irresistible it would get. Although this dish was really high in saturated fats and calories, most doctors recommended avoiding trendy foods like these for their link to heart problems too. Hence, people took much more cautionary attitudes toward their line blurring, making Hamburger Helper pizzas a thing of the past. Now let's put the Frankenburger casseroles and chicken pot pies aside and go back to a real icon like the shepherd's pie. Your mother knows of this, her mother knows of this, her mother's dad knows of this, and his fourth cousin had this every year for family gatherings. Not an exaggeration by any means, the shepherd's pie really was just that loved across every state. Just simple meats like lamb or ground beef cooked or minced to their limit, baked and topped with mashed potatoes in a casserole. Literally, what more does a person even ask of a plate of food? Can we get much higher? was the question on most chefs' minds, as shepherd's pie was hard to improve on, making the market highly competitive. No one had one unique standout shepherd's pie, and most were as good as each other. Of course, that meant great things for customers, but sadly, those days of privilege and good-tasting casseroles are gone now. Shepherd's pie is more a Southern tradition than a statewide phenomenon now. Coca-Cola decided to put its hat in the race too with Tab Soda. Before the days of Diet Coke, we had this, which was launched in 1963 for the very first time. It was their first ever diet soda, and they were trying hard to make this the next big thing. It was targeted towards women, especially because of the promise of it being significantly lower in calories, but it was overall marketed as a more weight-conscious version of the famous cola everyone's come to love. Still, soda is soda. It'll never be as good for you as water, even if it's made with better ingredients and less calories. It was lighter on the sugar, so that helped sell the image that it was going in a different direction from normal Coke as well. Baby boomers became real health freaks over the time, but the quirky pink can helped it get out there in terms of advertising. Everyone can remember cans of pink Tab soda lining up the shelves at grocery stores, though most people who were born after its heyday wouldn't remember it at all. People probably still think Coke Zero is the first diet soda they ever put out. You take all the best parts of a mousse, the creaminess, the texture, the softness, the way it melts in your mouth and takes you back to better days. Stuffed peppers can likely be traced back to the ancient Middle East, but stuffed pepper casserole? That is completely an American marvel. Stuffed pepper casserole was mostly famous in rural parts of the states where farming and growing chilies was a common practice. Households started using freshly grown chilies to create a casserole variation of stuffed peppers that would eventually be known as stuffed pepper casserole. Ground beef was used as an added protein, and peppers were cut up to be mixed with rice and cheese. This would then be cooked in a tomato sauce to create a deconstructed stuffed pepper dish. Today, you would barely come across this casserole on an average dinner spread at any home. The dish never became famous in the first place, so it's no surprise that barely anyone serves it anymore. However, taste-wise, it's a shame that stuffed pepper casserole is forgotten today. Brunswick stew is both heartwarming and mysterious. Its true origins are still a matter of debate. Brunswick County, Virginia, and Brunswick County, Georgia, claim to be the birthplace of this tomato-rich stew, which dates back to the 19th century. Regardless of its origin, Brunswick stew has always been about using local, seasonal ingredients and stretching them to feed a crowd. Traditional recipes used wild animals such as squirrels or rabbits, but nowadays chicken and pork are the usual protein pick for this stew. The stew is thickened with crushed tomatoes, chicken, and lima seeds, sometimes adding a little barbecue sauce for an extra smokiness. Long ago, this dish was a communal affair, made in massive pots and often cooked over a wood fire for hours until every ingredient was melt-in-your-mouth tender. In Brunswick, Georgia, there's a 25-gallon cast iron pot that claims to be the original Brunswick stew pot. It's big enough to feed an entire town. Southerners have been known to argue over whose Brunswick stew is best, with each family passing down their own secret recipe. But whether you're making it for a crowd or just stocking up in the freezer, Brunswick stew will fill your kitchen with the scent of comfort and nostalgia. Spinach artichoke dip is a beloved classic that has been a staple at parties and gatherings for decades. Its popularity skyrocketed in the 1970s, thanks in part to its introduction at chain restaurants like the Olive Garden. While it has roots in classic American cuisine, the dip's creamy and flavorful combination of spinach and artichokes made it a hit as a restaurant appetizer around the globe. This warm, creamy dip combines spinach, artichokes, and cheese into a comforting blend that's both rich and flavorful. It can be served with an array of dippers, from crunchy tortilla chips and pita bread to fresh vegetable sticks and crusty bread slices. It's easy to make, yet always feels like a treat. Whether you're hosting a casual get-together or a more formal gathering, spinach artichoke dip brings a touch of retro elegance and comfort to the table. Cioppino is the ultimate coastal comfort food, a steaming bowl of seafood goodness in a tomato and wine broth that practically transports you to the Pacific coast. This Italian-American stew originated with San Francisco's Italian fishermen, who'd throw together whatever the sea offered up that day, whether it was crab, clams, mussels, shrimp, or fish. The magic of Cioppino is in its flexibility. No hard rules here, just a satisfying mix of the freshest seafood around. The base is a flavorful blend of garlic, onions, tomatoes, and wine, simmered down to a rich, aromatic broth. Add in a touch of fennel for sweetness, a sprinkle of fresh basil and some red pepper flakes for heat, and let each piece of seafood cook just until tender. Traditionally, Cioppino is served with a hearty loaf of sourdough bread. After all, no one wants to leave even a drop of that amazing broth behind. And here's a little fun fact for you. The name Cioppino comes from the Italian word ciupan, which means little soup, though there's nothing little about the big, bold flavors in this dish. One spoonful, and you'll feel like you're catching a salty ocean breeze right off the San Francisco docks. Perfect for seafood lovers or anyone wanting to wow with a new recipe, this stew will steal the spotlight. Pair it with a crisp glass of white wine to complete the experience and savor a taste of the California coast. No travel required. So, who here remembers the infamous egg yolk cookies? Now, this is a recipe that might surprise you. Egg yolk cookies were a delicate treat that was often overlooked, and Grandma's egg yolk cookies were legendary. They were so light and buttery, they practically melted in your mouth. But let's be honest, they weren't everyone's cup of tea, and the last ones left in Grandma's cookie tin. How these cookies came to life is a good story to tell. Legend has it that these were a result of a sweet accident when someone's granny decided to use up extra egg yolks that were left over from other recipes. This was especially true in times when home bakers were making a lot of custards or puddings. Grandma's egg yolk cookies had a unique flavor and a melt-in-your-mouth texture that set them apart from other cookies. Here is a casserole that came from Latin American cuisine and worked really well, which is the infamous Mexican egg casserole. Typically stuffed with popular Mexican spices and chilies, along with eggs baked into a dish jam packed with cheese, this meant that you had no worries. Ordering this meant you were getting twice the bang for your buck. No tastes were coming close to the area of flavors this was in, and none that tried to copy it succeeded. See, American flavors do work, but they often have a certain blandness. Spices are not as prevalent in traditional American cuisine, and dishes like these help fill that gap. Mexican egg casseroles were a common find at any Latin American diner or restaurant, perfect as takeout, a meal to enjoy on a date, or even as a treat to savor all by yourself. Nowadays, most restaurants do not commonly sell this casserole anymore, but some old-school Mexican joints may still make a mean one. Okay, now let's spice things up a bit with this next one. Heinz cream of tomato soup with a kick of chili was a bold twist on the classic tomato soup. Heinz, a brand famous for tomato soup, decided to add a little extra kick to this spicy version. The result was a creamy tomato base with a delightful hint of chili heat, perfect for those who like their tomato soup with a bit of a punch. The history of Heinz tomato soup dates back to 1897 when Heinz first introduced their classic recipe. This spicier variant was a fun, limited-time addition to their lineup, but it seems it didn't stick around for long. Still, it remains a memorable flavor for those who had the chance to try it. If old-fashioned apple pie had one competitor back in the day, it was definitely Great-Grandma's peach cobbler. This classic dessert featured a sweet, juicy peach filling topped with a buttery, biscuit-like crust. Peach cobbler has its roots in the American South, where fresh peaches are abundant during the summer months. Great-Grandma's recipe was cherished for its perfect balance of sweet and tart flavors, with the cobbler topping baked to a golden brown perfection. Served warm with a scoop of vanilla ice cream, it was the ultimate comfort food. It was also an item you'd see everywhere in bakeries. Well, not anymore though, because it has fallen out of favor and replaced with more sophisticated desserts like peach crumble. Nothing tastes like Grandma's cooking though. Not even the crumble cookies. So far, we have two solid options for salads with a sandwich variation for one of them, but what if you do not like protein in your salads? Want them on the sweeter, more dessert-y side? Then molded cranberry orange salads have your name written on them wrapped up in a bow. Some normal or raspberry gelatin and frozen cranberries, plus apples and oranges cut into wedges, would make for an incredibly sweet and delightful salad that had everything you wanted in it taste-wise. It also did wonders for your skin with a steady supply of vitamins and the benefits of cranberries. So not only would grandmothers make this for their beloved families, but they would sneak a bowl on the side for themselves too. Despite the ingredients being relatively easy to get, this was more of an upper-class dish popular in affluent areas. Moving on, we have Ham Delights. This one tastes even better than it looks. These bite-sized sandwiches were a 1970s party staple, made with soft rolls, ham, Swiss cheese, and a flavorful poppy seed butter glaze. The rolls were typically brushed with the butter mixture and baked until the cheese melted, creating a gooey, savory treat. The combination of the sweet rolls, salty ham, and tangy cheese was a match made in heaven. Now, it wasn't the healthiest snack on the table, but trust me, resisting this bad boy wasn't an option. Ham Delights were often served warm, making them a comforting and satisfying snack. With the advent of pre-sliced deli meats and ready-made rolls, Ham Delights offered a quick and easy way to serve guests something tasty without spending hours in the kitchen. They've somewhat faded from the party scene, but their delicious simplicity is timeless. So, if you're looking for an easy and tasty appetizer, Ham Delights are a great choice. Stew is a true comfort food, perfect for anyone who loves deep, meaty flavors with a luxuriously silky texture. Despite the name, oxtail simply refers to the tail of cattle, rich with collagen and connective tissue, making it perfect for slow-cooked dishes. As it simmers, oxtail transforms, becoming incredibly tender and melt in your mouth, with a broth so thick it's almost like gravy. Loaded up with carrots, potatoes, onions, and warming spices, oxtail stew feels both fancy and wonderfully homey. Enjoyed for centuries around the world, from Jamaican and Caribbean versions to European classics, oxtail has a humble yet flavorful history. And here's a fun fact. In medieval times, oxtail was considered a lesser cut, eaten mostly by peasants. Today, though, it's a delicacy with prices to match. The key to perfect oxtail stew? Patience. This is no quick meal. Slow cooking it for several hours brings out its full, rich flavor while letting the bones add even more depth to the broth. For an extra layer of flavor, try adding a splash of red wine or a dash of soy sauce. Serve with rice, mashed potatoes, or even dumplings to soak up every last drop of the hearty sauce. For a dish that's both rustic and refined, oxtail stew is a timeless favorite just waiting to be rediscovered in your kitchen. This is a very classic dish that was often prepared by Grandma in winter. Do not be put off by the word rabbit. It's a tender, lean meat with a mild flavor that's often compared to chicken, but with a bit more character. Oh, and by the way, yet chicken and rice casseroles, despite employing similar ideas of basic dishes that work great along with a fine casserole, did not hit as well as people thought it would. The textures of grilled chunks of chicken with rice, gravy, or a spicy sauce and cheese were not appealing. Not as much as it theoretically should be, but so many things are better in imagination than on a plate at your table. Chicken and rice casseroles definitely were something that had a very natural fall into irrelevance. They did not have much of a presence back in the day either. People wanted their casseroles to feel like a buffed-up pizza, and this just was not doing that for folks. So it has become an idea health-obsessed housewives from the 70s may remember. Cozy hearty food went to its golden age with the advent of tamale pies. Tamale pies were a casserole dish that included enchilada sauces, tamales, ground beef, cheese, and a spicy tomato sauce. And of course, something for the crunch, which cornmeal crust did a great job at providing. Nothing rivaled the sensation of a good tamale pie, which you could find in any respectable restaurant, especially in cities in the Southwest. Most of these savory-type dishes that challenge the tame spice tolerance of an average Joe get popular down south. Perhaps they could share their flair for spice with other regions of the USA someday. Unfortunately, the dish reminded a family tradition after its days in the spotlight and dwindled from kitchens, now largely being a fond memory. Venison stew is a hearty, outdoorsy classic that transforms lean game meat into a warm, comforting meal. Imagine tender chunks of venison simmered in a savory, rich broth alongside carrots, potatoes, onions, and a blend of earthy herbs. Venison's natural, slightly sweet flavor shines in this dish, complemented beautifully by a splash of red wine or dark beer for extra depth. And here's the best part. Venison stew is for the adventurers, the hunters, or anyone wanting to shake up their winter dinner routine with something special. Venison isn't your everyday meat. It's low in fat but packed with protein, making it a perfect choice if you want a hearty meal that won't weigh you down. The key to a great venison stew? Letting it cook low and slow to bring out the meat's tender, luxurious texture. Fun fact: in medieval Europe, venison was so prized that only the nobility could legally hunt it, so this stew comes with a touch of gourmet history. Toss in a few juniper berries or bay leaves for a rustic, woodsy note, and don't forget a crusty baguette to soak up every last drop of that rich, flavorful broth. Ideal for sharing around a fire, real or imagined. Venison stew is wholesome, warming, and brings a taste of the wild right to your table. Stuffed potato pancakes are a delight to have on their own, but they go great with any kind of syrup or dip too. And if you had grandkids coming over and did not know what to make, this was a surefire bet. Potatoes have always been a massive staple of American cuisine and culture, partly because they form the basis of many simple, affordable dishes. An example of this is how in the Depression there were several potato-based dishes that people regularly adopted, and they stuck in the cultural landscape of American cooking much longer after the dust from the recession had settled. In states like Ohio, Oregon, and Idaho, it is still common to see potato-centered dishes taking the #1 spot. So imagine the rounds they made back when they were truly in style. Taking a break away from the McDonald's and the Wendy's, stuffed potato pancakes usually have bits of meat stuffed in them like sausages, pork, or ground beef. And it is not only packed with flavor but a great dish to eat if you are looking to bulk up too. Grandma does know best, after all. And you pair that with all the goodness of salmon. Salmon is easily one of the best proteins you can ever target your hands on, and it's definitely one of the best things to ever come out of the ocean. Salmon mousse, then, is understandably something that has the potential to be a national hit. That's exactly what it ended up being too, because ever since it started hitting restaurant menus in the 1970s, the Salmon Mousse Express started, and it did not stop for anybody. Boomers loved it because it was so easy to make it in advance, and it was perfect for gatherings that were casual in spirit but a little more elegant. You know, when you like to dress up with your friends, eat a little fancier, feel good, that kind of stuff. It was a chilled appetizer made with cream cheese, gelatin, and pureed salmon, so it was easy to get the ingredients, and everyone loved every bite of it. 3VD. Chicken stew is a traditional recipe which consists of a thick, creamy chicken stew containing potatoes, carrots, peas, and pieces of chicken. The appeal is elementary, robust, and ideal for lunch or dinner on cold winter days. This is a simple stew that can be prepared with a few ingredients, beginning with the preparation of broth. And let's not forget about dumplings, right? Who can resist soft and tender dumplings which are soaking up that warm stew? This stew is a winter classic that's often found at family dinners, where Grandma used to simmer it on the stove, filling the kitchen with its mouth-watering aroma. Here's a little history fact about this dish. Chicken stew with dumplings got popular especially during the Great Depression because it was a good way of economizing the little available ingredients when preparing a meal. For it to be even more enjoyable, you can sauté it with some fresh herbs such as thyme or rosemary and a dash of cream for creaminess. Classic chicken stew is a true definition of an old-school meal that resets your mood with every spoonful. Stuff like lima beans are a pretty solid palate to start. They used to be featured in this meat and 3-style meals which involved meat. That was a tradition that peaked in the 70s, and it basically let a customer pick any one kind of meat and pair it with side dishes, up to 3 at a time, hence the name. It was definitely more of a southern lunch thing. Lima beans were one of those sides that would often get paired with traditional food like casseroles or roast beef, or even pot roasts. It was a great and affordable side to work with, and it worked a little bit of healthy eating into your life too, all while costing just a few cents. Now, I know my audience, and I know we've all grown up on 50 different flavors of cheese, from the finest imported wheels to the best local brands, but which of you really remembers Limburger cheese? It definitely was something that only a boomer would remember, and its glory days were in the 70s when European immigrants brought it over in bulk, and it started making a name for itself. It wasn't at the front lines making names and stealing pages in cookbooks, but it was on top of every cheese platter, smothered between every sandwich, and served as a topping on many other dishes regularly. Limburger sounds German, right? You'd be right, because it does have German origins. In fact, it also has German ties, as it was heavily marketed at communities with German-American populations, which were really common in the Midwest in that era. All right, I know these are all dishes that you can make at home and even make a whole day out of, but sometimes all you want is to pop open the garage, take your wife out for a night on the town, and have some comfort food. How did people do that in the 1970s? This one is definitely something that did not sit well with some, while it was something being served at every dinner for others. The tuna noodle casserole was a divider, a controversy raiser, if you will, and one that set people into arguments across every forum, thread, and tweet out there. Some people said that America was too stuck in the brief moments where it hit culinary gold and needed to experiment more if it wanted to recreate those highs. Others said there was no need of messing up a dish that worked fine on its own, always has, and already has 100 different versions. So what you had was something you had to ask your friends if they were okay with, or else you were ordering out. When you see it from that angle, tuna noodle casseroles could never have really lasted too long. Just like its predecessor on this list, baked spaghetti casseroles did not last too long either. We remember well and clear what people's candid opinions on beef and noodles casserole was. A lot of the millennial crowd believed that it was a dish with no real sense of self. Like, if you want spaghetti, just have spaghetti. Casseroles are somewhere else on the spectrum, and maybe they were right in avoiding it without even a single try. Some people did give it a fair shot, though, and ended up liking it. But the general consensus was that spaghetti sauces do not go well with casserole dishes. Nor do they fare well when baked with cheese. Baked spaghetti casseroles kind of had a cult following, and because of that, they never lasted long enough to be more than a footnote in the ages. Angel Delight is something we can thank our mates down in Great Britain for, because the first immigrants that came to America ended up bringing it over. Angel Delight sounds like a cheap dollar store snack, but it's this rich dessert that uses a powdered mix with milk to make a really light, airy whipped dessert. The powdered mix would come in all sorts of flavors like butterscotch, strawberry, and even chocolate. Kids all around the country loved it, and it was a great and easy way to have a palate cleanser on hand. Sometimes you need a rush of sugar, but you can't afford a whole cake or spare the time to get into a day of baking, which I've always found to be an acquired taste as far as hobbies go. Boomers loved Angel Delight because it created that middle ground between both options and made their weekly glucose rush a lot more accessible. Easy-to-make desserts like this, Jell-O and pudding mixes were one of the trademarks of the convenience-driven food culture of the 1970s, which saw a lot of stuff like this come out to fit in with the new lifestyle Americans were finding for themselves. Namely, eating and watching TV, which had become a major part of everyone's day, as almost every household started having a TV set up, and then came refrigeration advancements, and then came things like microwaves, slow cookers, etc. You get the picture. Basically, cooking had never been as fast or easy as it was in the 70s, and it's only gotten much easier ever since comparatively. Hey, Koi! With everybody trying their hand at making America's comfort food more healthier, now let's talk about Meemaw's milk pudding. This comforting dessert was a staple in many southern kitchens and offered a sweet finish to any meal. Made with just a few simple ingredients, milk, sugar, and a touch of vanilla, it's a classic example of how simple can be absolutely delicious. Milk pudding dates back to early American cuisine, where it was often enjoyed as a treat or a way to use up surplus milk. Grandmas decided to take it up a notch with a sprinkle of nutmeg or a dollop of whipped cream. Here's something you probably didn't know about this delicacy. Meemaw's milk pudding is a simpler, old-fashioned version of what we now know as rice pudding. Rice pudding is the fancier version. So if you ever crave something simple and good, milk pudding is where it's at. Pepper pot stew is also known as the soup that won the war and has lots of spice, history, and tradition as well. Its origins were in the Caribbean, but it was embraced by African, Native, and Creole chefs who came to Philadelphia during the Revolution. It is stated that due to pepper pot stew, George Washington's soldiers were able to survive the winter they had ahead of them, which makes this dish a part of legends in American cooking. Tripe-based with hefty vegetables and hot peppers as the main ingredient, pepper pot stew is still spicy and peppery even to this date. This stew is hearty and comforting and really has a full range of flavor profiles with deep, meaty tones complemented by the freshness of hot peppers. Allspice or thyme will give the stew warmth, while potatoes and dumplings make the stew richer and ensure that every drop of the broth is consumed. This food was originally sold on the streets of Philadelphia in the 1800s as pepper pot stew, cooked in steaming carts. It became so popular that even the city of Philadelphia earned the nickname of Pepper Pot City. While tripe is not as typical in contemporary renditions, this is a well-liked and distinctive dish. Give it a go to add some historic touch to the winter meals. Pepper pot stew is not just a meal, it is history, put into a bowl, garnished with spices that will give your tongue a good telling off. Mrs. Dash Spice is an odd name, but don't worry, the kid from The Incredibles didn't finally get married. We're just talking about a salt-free seasoning blend that really made a name for itself back in the 1970s. See, Mrs. Dash was aimed specifically at one group that was making a lot more noise than any others. It was the health-conscious crowd, which had been raising hell all over America about how a growing fast food culture and an over-reliance on fatty meats and foods has ruined the general health of the American public. McDonald's tried to come out with fitness bands, burger joints started having salads, and companies started coming out with things like this to combat reputation-damaging accusations like that. Boomers definitely took to this seasoning well, especially since it was proven to be better for your heart than other seasoning mixes you could find at the time. One thing that was also really present in the 1970s for boomers and kids alike was a growing interest in the cuisines, culture, and diets of the broader world. Suddenly, Americans were really interested in every scent, flavor, spice mix, and recipe that came from beyond their borders. I'm talking about exploring the farthest reaches of Italian cuisine, picking up new tricks from Mediterranean cuisine, and trying out European dishes that they never had experimented with before. Pickled beef tongue was a classic back in the day. Some love it, others not so much. Now, before you jump to any conclusions, just hear me out because it's not as bizarre as it sounds. Yeah, beef tongue was found in many national cuisines and was used for taco fillings in Mexico and for open-faced sandwiches in the United Kingdom. Beef tongue, whether braised or pickled, was a versatile dish served both hot and cold. Believe it or not, it was a staple back in the day. It actually tastes pretty good if you close your eyes and pretend you're not eating beef tongue because that can sound a tad bit too much. It's not the healthiest meat though because beef tongue is very high in fat, which contributes up to 72% of its caloric content. It has become rare today, but you will be surprised to see how many places still sell beef tongue burritos down in Mexico. Yikes! Chicken pot pie. Casserole needs no explaining because it takes three things the citizens of the US love and makes them into one polished, perfect food. Firstly, a chicken pot pie, the kind you are used to your mother making or your dad picking up from that great spot at every corner. Then you paired chicken pot pie with a casserole dish and topped it off with a biscuit topping, which made for the perfect savory flavor. You had yourself a dish that gave the crunchy, the gooey, the tangy, and the food coma all in one. One that people had in every state during holidays as this dish would be center stage on the dinner table. Man, this was even widespread enough that people would sometimes bring it into work. It really makes you think, what made something like that go out of fashion? Maybe people wanted to move away from dishes that had nothing but meaty flavors with cheeses and sauces. Next up, we have lentil soup from Progresso. Now, I know what you're thinking. Lentil soup? Really? But trust me, this wasn't your grandma's lentil soup. Progresso kicked it up a notch with roasted veggies, giving it a smoky, flavorful twist. It was a great way to sneak in some extra protein and fiber. This was one of the healthiest canned meals out there, and its taste spoke for itself. Lentils have been a staple food for centuries, dating back to ancient Egypt and Rome. They're packed with nutrients and are a great source of plant-based protein. Progresso's version took this traditional dish and gave it a modern twist with roasted vegetables. Lentils are still loved in many countries in Asia, but the States have had enough of this protein option. Unfortunately, this particular variety has been discontinued, but it was a great example of how Progresso was always experimenting with new and exciting flavors. This soup might not be for everyone, but it was definitely a dish that had people licking food off their fingers. So let's go to an eggplant-based dish that a lot of people didn't really give much love to towards the start of the 2000s. I'm definitely talking about eggplant parmesan, which is this southern Italian dish that became really popular in the 1970s thanks to Italian immigrants making a lot of culinary culture from the motherland popular. It was an extremely vegetable-heavy dish, and that gave it the momentum it needed to succeed in an America that was desperately looking for more greens in its food. Boomers in particular grew up when this dish was first being introduced to menus for many restaurants across the nation. It meant that people for once were exploring more than just the typical side of Italian culture. This is actually a dish that became popular in Naples, but in America, it involves coating the eggplant in flour, frying it until it's golden, and then serving it dipped with marinara sauce and cheese. This makes a really good Italian-American comfort food that's hard to beat. The reason this worked so well in particular is because it has all the basic preparation that most American comfort foods do: breadcrumbs deep frying, a lot of cheese, the usual. It also manages to still not compromise on how healthy it is to gain flavor, which is why it was the Italian poster boy of the vegetarian movement in the 70s. Now, how do you mix healthy eating with satisfying your sweet tooth? Kind of feels like both of them are permanently at odds, but they don't really have to be. Progresso Italian wedding soup. This was a classic for a reason. I mean, who doesn't love a bowl of warm, comforting soup filled with tiny meatballs, spinach, and carrots? It was like a little taste of Italy in a can. Perfect for a cozy day in. Despite the name, Italian wedding soup isn't traditionally served at weddings in Italy. It's believed the name comes from the idea that it's a hearty and celebratory soup, perfect for a special occasion. The Italian wedding soup has roots in southern Italian cuisine and was brought to America by Italian immigrants. Progresso's version was a convenient way to enjoy this classic dish at home. Though it's no longer available, it was a beloved choice for those who enjoyed a taste of Italy. I'm talking about rabbit stew. The meat of rabbit is rich in proteins and comparatively has less fat content than most meats. Now, this stew defines comfort and health altogether. The basic ingredients for rabbit stew are root vegetables such as carrots, potatoes, onions, and mushrooms cooked in a meaty gravy. This dish has deep roots in European cooking, especially in France and Italy, where rabbits were a backyard staple. Fun fact: rabbit meat is probably one of the world's most eco-friendly sources of meat since it needs fewer resources for production than other meats such as beef. To get the best out of your rabbit stew, cook it low and slow, letting the meat fall off the bone and infuse the broth with a rich, gamey flavor. If you're feeling adventurous, pour a few spoonfuls of red wine into the pot, or spice it up with a few twirls of thyme and rosemary. Accompany it with a crusty loaf of bread for the bread-dipping accompaniment, and you've got yourself a stew that's comforting, tangy, and a tad exotic, a real winter favorite that needs a revival. Crêpes Suzette were one of the new things that we got from the French, and it was this really elegant dish with a lot of showmanship. That meant it was the pride and joy of home chefs everywhere because it was one of those dishes that felt like a flex if you made it, both to you and everyone else in the room too. It used caramelized sugar, butter, zest, and Grand Marnier, and you would have to flambe it tableside. So even watching somebody prepare this felt like a whole show right before your meal. The dish itself was supposedly made by an assistant waiter known as Henri Charpentier, who was making food for King Edward VII at the time, but he happened to set the thing on fire by accident. Guess God has funny ways of handing out good luck because instead of ruining it, the dish ended up tasting better. The rest, as they say, is history. You might be thinking why something like this got popular in the 70s, though, which so far has been marked by its love of easygoing food. That's because everyone likes to pull out all the stops once in a while and show people what they've really got going on. Every premium French restaurant in New York had this on their menu, so naturally it was embraced with very open arms by baby boomers, who couldn't wait to try everything else in the world too. Speaking of much-needed digestive health, apple salads did just that and were a commonly used weapon in the culinary arsenal of parents everywhere. A delectable apple salad with Honeycrisp apples, dried cranberries, some pecans and grapes would make for a unique salad that could easily serve as an impromptu appetizer for a party or a star on a well-equipped salad bar. A slightly sweetened mayonnaise dressing also did a lot for this dish. And if you did not vibe too much with mayo as a dressing, you could always switch to French or ranch dressings. People used all kinds of apples besides Honeycrisp ones, such as Fuji apples or Braeburn apples or Granny Smith apples. The idea was to commit to some serious trial and error because the small difference in apples meant a lot for the dish. That's where recipes like chicken Marengo come in. Before we get into what the dish itself is, let's talk a bit about its backstory. It gets its name from the Battle of Marengo, which was fought by Napoleon in the year 1800. A lot of Napoleon's military exploits were famous enough to warrant food being named after him, so it's really no wonder. The next time you have this, you can bring that up as a fun fact to seem smarter at the table. Fast forward 170 years to 1970, and while nobody remembered the battle or Napoleon, the word Marengo is something people use every day. Either they'll be ordering this for takeout or whipping up a few plates for themselves and the family. After all, it takes your basic ingredients like chicken, olive oil, and garlic and mixes it white wine or brandy to get an amazing dish that is both practical and stylish. We've had a surprising lack of pasta on this list so far. Squirrel stew might make you do a double take, but it was once a staple food in rural America, especially in the South. Think of it as the original farm-to-table meal before that term was trendy. Squirrel meat is surprisingly lean, with the flavor somewhere between chicken and rabbit. Plus, it's tender and flavorful when slow-cooked. Pair it with vegetables like carrots, onions, and potatoes. Maybe add a little cider vinegar or a handful of herbs, and you've got a stew like no other. Why squirrel, you ask? During the Great Depression, people turned to this common critter as an easily available source of protein. Squirrels are plentiful and easy to find. Therefore, it was not unusual for Grandma to throw a squirrel into the pot. In fact, some regions still celebrate the tradition, with squirrel stew cook-offs and recipes passed down through generations. Squirrel meat has been shown to have more protein per gram than beef or chicken. Therefore, it is nutritious and unique. If you're game to try this classic, remember that it's all about seasoning. Bay leaves, thyme, and even a little hot sauce can make this stew delicious and memorable. Embrace your pioneering spirit with a bowl of squirrel stew. It is very delicious and extremely nostalgic. Oxtail, then there's no better main course than some lobster Newburg. This dish brings you the best the ocean has to offer, and in coastal states, especially around the Pacific, it was all that baby boomers could eat or talk about. It became kind of a social thing, too. Got a new nice raise? Time for some lobster Newburg. Hit it off with that girl you like? Boyfriend finally proposed? Having a kid? Got a new pet? Any reason was a good reason to have some. It was a rich dish that was made using lobster meat, butter, cream, cognac, and it was served on toast or in puff pastry. It also had sherry, and it was one of the symbols of fine dining in the 70s. It followed the interest that most people were having in continental cuisine, and depending on what neighborhood you were in, this was either one of the best meals you were going to have or a sign that America's bringing in new and better food. Some people had been used to eating stuff like this, but for others, it really was a treat they hadn't experienced, mostly because this is actually a French dish. But not everyone has the time, wallet, or even the desire for upscale restaurants, bougie dining, and poor portions that leave you wanting to order a pizza from Joe's or Larry's with wings. Some people need their fix of spices, chicken, sauces, all melded together for a full meal. And that's just not something I can stand for. Let's change that with beefaroni, which was one of the best things a certain chef named Boyardee ever left us with. It came out in the 1960s, so the fact that it hit a milestone in popularity just 10 years later definitely speaks for the quality. Rest assured, I can testify too, this dish is worth your time, effort, and money. Boomers loved it for a reason, and that's because it fit into everything the era was trying to achieve. Good, convenient food that's easy to make, needs ingredients you probably already have, and can work for an entire group or a single person depending on how you make it. It also helped a lot that TV culture was booming around the time this came out, so a lot of boomers grew up having beefaroni while watching their favorite Tuesday TV show. It typically was made with elbow macaroni, ground beef, and tomato sauce with cheese, so you might be getting images of an offshoot of lasagna. Best not to confuse this, though, because beefaroni stands on its own 2 feet as a dish that'll rock your world. Let's talk about a classic, Hormel chili with beans. This was the ultimate game day food, or perfect for a cozy night in. It was hearty, flavorful, and packed with protein. Chili is believed to have originated in Texas, though its exact origins are debated. It's a popular dish with many regional variations. Hormel chili with beans was a classic canned chili option that brought a spicy kick and hearty beans to the table. Hormel, a brand known for its canned meat products, introduced this chili as a quick and satisfying meal for those who loved a bit of heat and a lot of flavor. Chili itself has a long history, with roots in Tex-Mex cuisine. Hormel's version aimed to capture that rich, spicy essence in a convenient can. Its combination of seasoned beef, beans, and spices made it a favorite among chili enthusiasts. Even though Hormel still has plenty of other chili options, this one has been discontinued. But if you ever feel adventurous, you can try whipping this one at home to satisfy the ultimate spice craving. A healthy contrast to the macaroni and cheese casserole is the zucchini tomato casserole. Often served with soy and onion dipping sauce, children preferred to stay away from this vegetable casserole, but adults loved the taste. If you have ever seen the film Ratatouille, the zucchini tomato casserole looks exactly like the main dish served up at the end. With sliced zucchini and tomatoes arranged in layered patterns and a hearty topping of cheese and breadcrumbs, the zucchini tomato casserole was truly Ratatouille coming to life. This casserole was preferred to be consumed during summers, as the tomatoes and zucchini were a refreshing alternative to heavier casseroles. Over time, the dish became less common amongst home chefs due to children disliking the vegetable base in this casserole. As fewer people cooked the casserole for dinner, it eventually disappeared from tables completely. Stepping away from the French and going a bit more back towards our patriotic roots, let's take a long, hard look at rice-a-roni next. Okay? So I know I said we're stepping away from the foreign influence, but don't shoot the messenger. Rice-a-roni was the work of an Italian immigrant named Domenica de Domenico, who was based in San Francisco. However, the story goes that her idea wasn't the original, and it was actually her neighbor that showed her an American rice pilaf recipe, mixing vermicelli noodles and sautéing it in butter with rice, cooking it in a broth. Domenica smelled good food, but saw a fat paycheck first, and she immediately decided to commercialize the dish. That was the start of what would eventually be released as rice-a-roni in 1958, and the packaged version took grocery stores by storm. It was known as the San Francisco Treat, and it was one of the first few examples of ready-made food that came in a box. Nobody had the hindsight to see it back then, but you could call it one of the ancestors of the packaged food we enjoy today. Let's break away from tradition and start right now, because egg creams are one very misleading plate of food. See, you would think you're about to experience some thick, rich, and creamy egg dish, but what you actually get is this dessert that's a little similar to eggnog. It's just made with seltzer water, chocolate syrup, and milk, but it became extremely popular in urban areas with middle-class boomers because it resembles soda fountain drinks. This was really true if you lived in New York, where a lot of people grew up on this, and it peaked in popularity during the post-World War II era. Right now, it's a bit of a nostalgic moment in time for baby boomers, and they still find comfort in grabbing U-Bet syrup and getting to work on a batch of egg creams. It wasn't like it was exclusive just to strictly gentrified and urban areas. The thing was simple enough that anybody could really make it and enjoy it. If you want to experience some fine dining, and I'm talking some proper rich people stuff, moving on, Let's talk about Grandma's Shoe Fly Pie. Rings a bell? This Pennsylvania Dutch classic was a true taste of Americana. Grandma's Shoe Fly Pie was a staple at family picnics back in the day. It was a pie that was both comforting and unique, with a flavor profile that was hard to forget. The secret to a great shoe fly pie was the molasses filling. It was a rich, sticky mixture of molasses, brown sugar, and spices. Shoe fly pie made a lot of buzz in the 19th century, with its name supposedly coming from the need to shoo away flies from the sweet molasses filling. Grandma's version of this pie was the highlight of the dinner table during the holidays and was often served with a cup of coffee. The best part? While this pie might sound intimidating, it was actually quite easy to make. The filling comes together in minutes, and the crumb topping is a breeze. Take it as a sign to whip this up and take it to your next potluck. Everyone's going to thank you. No retro finger food list would be complete without pigs in a blanket. Ah, the classic. These delightful snacks featured cocktail sausages wrapped in crescent roll dough and baked until golden brown. Pancake dough was also sometimes used, although this combination is more commonly served like a corn dog and sold as a pancake on a stick. The combination of the soft, buttery pastry and the savory sausage made them a crowd pleaser at parties and family gatherings. Now, this is the United States variant of the iconic appetizer. They are distinct from the British dish of pigs in blankets, where the sausages are instead wrapped in bacon. Pigs in a blanket were often served with mustard or ketchup for dipping, adding an extra layer of flavor. They were simple to make, yet so satisfying, making them a favorite for both kids and adults. While they may not be as trendy as they once were, pigs in a blanket remains a beloved classic that always brings smiles to the table. This next one is also a fusion of two different classics, so it is kind of a new take on both, just like macaroni casseroles. But have you ever thought about what a meatloaf burger would look like? It's not just something you might think about on a boring Saturday. It's a tried-and-true combo that has been around for ages. People may not know about it on a mainstream level nowadays, but it has been a local top 5 dish in states like Washington, New York, and Arkansas. Everyone in America loves a good meatloaf, and back in the days of our grandparents, it was one of the most common homemade lunches. What was one of the most regularly eaten takeout options? Burgers. Hamburgers, cheeseburgers, double patty behemoths, you name it. People ate it, and eventually they wanted to see what else could be done with the burger format, which works all too well. Lo and behold, the meatloaf burger made a name for itself rather quickly as a very filling and delicious meal to whip up at home. Mulligan stew is typically a leftover dish, and indeed, it is the definition of throwing together everything except for the kitchen sink. It has its roots in the Great Depression when individuals combined all sorts of commodities that were edible in a pot: meat, vegetables, beans, pasta, and anything that could be imagined. Thus, no two Mulligan stews are the same. It is one of the most versatile, or rather, one of the most lenient, dishes to prepare. Mulligan stew is based on what is known as the hobo stew, in which you subject various ingredients to uncertain fates that result in an amazing stew. The factor that makes Mulligan stew stand out is the fact that it is one of the cheapest meals that can be prepared. Got leftover beef? Toss it in. An extra can of beans? Throw it in too. This consists of potatoes, carrots, onions, tomatoes, some appetizers, and whatever remains in the kitchen. In the Great Depression, massive quantities of Mulligan stew would be cooked in large batches, and everyone would bring something to the kettle. This sharing and utilization of every little component is the essence of Mulligan stew. Oh, no preparations here. Simply use your creativity. To give it a boost, season with a hint of Worcestershire, or alternatively, season with a pinch of paprika. So the next time you find your fridge is almost empty, then maybe it is time to bring out the Depression-era chef in you and try out Mulligan stew. It is the stew equivalent of the Mystery Box Challenge and will surely warm you. Macaroni and cheese casserole had a proud and very cherished career in that bright period after things like tamale pies became more popular. Also, it is one of the only pasta and cheese casserole dishes to really work. Turns out, two foods known for being a reliable friend when in need of one become your bestie when you put them together. Almost too soft, completely filled with cheese and chewy hot macaroni with all the perks of a casserole, this dish was a certified MVP of the 70s and 80s. However, it eventually got out of hand when people began creating excessively fatty versions with more cheese, sausages, and other toppings. Since then, it has gone down in rank because you gotta care about your gut too, you know? Campbell's Oyster Stew was another unique entry in Campbell's lineup. This soup featured oysters in a creamy, buttery broth, a delicacy for seafood lovers. Oyster stew has roots in early American cuisine, especially in coastal areas where fresh oysters were abundant. Campbell's Oyster Stew was a way for people to enjoy the luxurious taste of oysters without needing to go to a seafood restaurant. Oyster stew is a traditional dish that has been enjoyed for centuries. It is believed to have originated in England. While it may not have been everyone's cup of tea, it was a notable attempt to bring a bit of seafood elegance to the canned soup aisle. Now, who doesn't love a good clam chowder? And this Panera Bread version was absolutely incredible. It was creamy, rich, and packed with clams. It was the perfect comfort food, especially when paired with a crusty piece of bread. Panera Bread clam chowder was a creamy seafood chowder that brought a taste of Panera's Bakery Cafe experience to the canned soup aisle. This soup was a favorite for those who loved seafood. Clam chowder is a classic New England dish. There were two main types: New England clam chowder, which is creamy, and Manhattan clam chowder, which is tomato-based. Panera Bread's clam chowder was inspired by the classic New England-style chowder, which has been a staple in American cuisine for centuries. One of the most iconic ways to enjoy Panera's clam chowder was in their famous sourdough bread bowl. This one unfortunately fell out of flavor, but Panera Bread's other soups continue to be enjoyed by many. Every spoonful of Irish lamb stew is like the warm embrace of the Emerald Isle. This signature stew is simple yet soulful. It uses just a few ingredients: lamb, potatoes, onions, and carrots, although it's perfect for a warm winter's night. But the Irish tend to do it year-round, especially on cold and foggy days when you need something hearty to cut through the cold. The star here is, of course, the lamb, which is so tender it's almost melting. But don't overlook the potatoes. They're not just sidekicks. It thickens the soup and gives the stew a smooth texture. During the Great Famine in Ireland, lamb stew was made from almost anything available. And this authentic Irish lamb stew never used any fancy flour or thickeners, just the natural starch of the potatoes, and it was delicious. You'll know it's done when you can't resist the smell. To raise the bar to the next level, add fresh herbs like thyme or parsley, and serve with Irish soda bread to soak up every drop of soup. This stew is as straightforward as it is satisfying, proving that you don't need a lot of ingredients for something truly delicious. It's simple, durable, and just waiting for you to warm it up. Okay, this one is like a warm hug from the past. Remember Grandma's classic meatloaf? This savory dish was a family dinner favorite, known for its comforting flavors and satisfying texture. Meatloaf has been a staple of American cuisine since the early 20th century, offering a budget-friendly way to feed a family. Grandma's recipe was particularly loved for its moist interior and flavorful crust, often served with mashed potatoes and vegetables. It started out as a way to use up leftover meat scraps, but became a cultural icon of comfort food. Who says sandwiches can't be fancy? Enter the mini tomato sandwiches with bacon mayonnaise. Bacon mayonnaise, I know you're all ears. Keep listening. These tiny bite-sized sandwiches featured ripe heirloom tomatoes nestled between slices of soft bread, with a delicious spread of bacon-flavored mayonnaise. The combination of juicy tomatoes and smoky bacon spread was a flavor explosion that captured the essence of summer in the 70s. Summer in the 70s was all about pool parties and finger-licking appetizers that were not only easy to enjoy, but also made every splash and sunny moment even more delicious. These mini sandwiches were also often served at garden parties and brunches, where their refreshing taste and elegant presentation made them a hit. Over time, they've been replaced by more elaborate canapés. If you're a tomato lover, these little sandwiches are a must-try. Bear meat might seem like something out of a survivalist's handbook, but it was once a prized delicacy in many cultures. The roast loin of bear was considered a special occasion dish, reserved for feasts and celebrations. This dish has deep roots in the culinary traditions of the early American settlers. As you can imagine, hunting a bear was a daunting task, so this meal was a reward for bravery. Apart from the hunting of the bears, this one wasn't complicated to whip up. All you needed was the loin, which is the tender strip of meat along the backbone, which was often roasted over an open fire. Now, this is one meaty dish. Well, it doesn't take rocket science to know why this one has vanished from our tables. I bet you're not up to the task of hunting a bear, are you? Meat pâtés were exactly like that for baby boomers that grew up being heavily influenced by French dishes like pâtés and techniques like mixing wine and flambeing the dish. These were continental recipes that made rounds in their home countries, and with a spin on them that modified them enough for the general American public, things like meat pâtés became fashionable appetizers. You would see them at dinner parties or have them with crackers. Some restaurants and places would even give it to you with toasted slices of baguette, which is a traditional French bread. Meat pâtés have a pretty strong flavor since they're usually made of liver, but it's always worth checking out this dish because it's a great source of protein and it tastes good enough to convert even the strongest white meat believer. Making your kids watch Popeye was one way to get them into eating spinach, or at least draw their attention towards it. Tuna salad has managed to stand the test of time pretty well, and it gets even more simple than ham salad does. It is great that grandmas back then were always around to shatter misconceptions around how salad is an incredibly bland and boring concept. The ways they made these salads would get even the most stubborn, protein-only diehard on the bandwagon. You would be surprised what onion, celery, some spices, and mayo can do to tuna. It is an incredible comfort food classic, and it works with freshly caught tuna or canned tuna. Back in the 1900s, basic dressings were most commonly used, but towards the late 90s, stuff like Dijon dressings also got really popular, and they only made it healthier because you would find it much easier to eat an extra bowl or two. Which do you prefer if you remember growing up with this? While we have one creating a luxury eating experience and the other being a healthy way to enjoy a classic, beef and noodles casserole is something that simply raises questions. Yes, people had many fond memories of coming back home from a bad date or a long shift to a cup of beef and egg noodles. Lines have to be drawn just as much as delectable food needs to be consumed, and Americans drew theirs by putting it in a casserole. Ground beef and egg noodles in a tomato sauce sure seemed like a good dose of mom's spaghetti. Only Mother Dearest never made her casseroles that way. Her spaghetti, meatballs, and her casserole pies were always separate dinners. Most old or middle-aged folk wanted to keep those customs, but the newer generations at the time were more open to it. Popular among the young crowd bold enough to try out new dishes, it eventually faded away as more and more people rejected the mix. Codfish stew is a beloved New England classic that celebrates the region's abundant seafood. This comforting dish brings together tender, flaky cod fillets in a rich tomato broth, along with hearty chunks of potato, onion, and sometimes a bit of celery or bell pepper for extra depth. The magic of this stew lies in its perfect balance, light but filling, with the sweetness of tomatoes offsetting the subtle ocean taste of the cod. It's the kind of meal that feels just right on a cold winter evening, warming you from the inside out. For generations, New Englanders have relied on cod as a dietary staple. Back when the Atlantic was teeming with fish, cod was so plentiful that it even served as a form of currency in colonial trade. To capture the authentic New England flavor, finish your stew with a sprinkle of fresh parsley and a squeeze of lemon juice. It adds a bright note that ties everything together. Traditionally, it's served with oyster crackers or a hunk of crusty bread, perfect for soaking up every drop of the savory broth. This humble yet flavorful stew is a true coastal treasure. Simple, satisfying, and steeped in history. All right, let's get a little weird with it. We're talking about Campbell's mock turtle soup. Now, before you wrinkle your nose, hear me out. This wasn't actually made from turtles. It was a Victorian-era concoction made with beef, veal, and sometimes even calf's head. Campbell's mock turtle soup might sound like something out of a fairy tale, but it was a real-life favorite for many. This soup was inspired by the traditional English dish, mock turtle soup, which was created as a more affordable alternative to the expensive turtle soup. The result was a unique, somewhat exotic flavor that set it apart from more common soups. The name mock turtle was just a fancy way of saying it was a fancy soup. Mock turtle soup was a popular dish in the 19th century. It was often served at grand dinners and banquets. Unfortunately, this historical recipe has long been discontinued, but it still holds a special place in the culinary world's history books. Hobo stew is a true anything-goes dish dating back to the Great Depression when folks would gather whatever ingredients they could find to make a meal. Originating from the hobo people who cooked it over an open fire in a large pot, this stew contains ground beef, potatoes, onions, carrots, and beans, and sometimes canned vegetables. It's a cheap dish where you can put together pretty much anything you have on hand and still have a warm, satisfying meal. Long ago, hobo stew was a communal event where every member of a group put in what he had on hand to contribute to the pot like a real-life mystery stew. Back in the day, hobos used to mark the houses of kind-hearted people with symbols, letting others know where a good meal could be found. But what makes a good hobo stew today? Use ground beef or sausage as base and then throw in any vegetable, beans, or canned meat. Gently add a dash of Worcestershire sauce, garlic, and pepper to enhance the taste. Enjoy it with bread, biscuits, or crackers, and you have yourself a simple but hearty meal ideal for the winter. Corn stew, or corn chowder as the Americans like to call it, is a thick soup made with corn, potatoes, and onions simmered in a creamy broth. It's sweet due to the corn, and thick and creamy because it is made with milk or cream. Plus, it's full of chunks of potato. For me, it is a lighter stew, but it still makes the heart warm and soulful, great for nights when no heavy meats are desired. Corn chowder is an older Native American dish which included corn as a central ingredient before European influence with cream and potatoes was incorporated into the dish. And another fun fact, I'm on fire today, chowder originates from the French. You may be familiar with broccoli casseroles, but did you know that pearl onion broccoli bake was a popular variant amongst people who enjoyed broccoli but wanted more from their casserole? This scrumptious recipe uses broccoli florets and pearl onions that are cooked in a creamy sauce made using heavy whipping cream and cream cheese. Do not let the creamy cheese sauce distract you from the fact that pearl onions have numerous health benefits attached to its name, like cardiovascular health and being an antioxidant. Vegetarian families across the state welcomed the dish onto their dinner tables because of how delicious and healthy it was. Given that the recipe required only a few ingredients, the cheap nature of the recipe made it popular amongst working-class and middle-income households as well. The dish, however, never found mainstream success, which is the main reason why, as time passed, lesser tables had pearl onion broccoli bake as a main dish. You must be pretty used to casseroles both from your mom's hands and your grandma's, but have you ever had a macaroni casserole straight from a veteran home chef of the 20th century? It can really change your view on the whole thing. This throws out all the typical casserole ingredients you might be used to, and you should look at this more like a pasta dish. Egg, milk, and some vegetables take center stage alongside the main star of the show, some classic macaroni. Some meats are used, but sparingly, and in the 1950s, people mostly skipped out on them. A thick layer of melted cheese on top with breadcrumbs and a side of ketchup. What is there not to love about this? It takes the concept of comfort food and cranks it up to 1,000. Well, in 1969, Cracker Barrel started making a name for itself in the South for providing comfort food of several different taste palettes. You had your meatloafs, you had fried chicken, you even had biscuits, all in a family-friendly, rustic environment that was oozing charisma and homeliness. It was hard to keep up with them, and it makes sense why Cracker Barrel managed to become such a popular food chain in that decade, as competitive as it was. It became a staple spot for family dinners and weekend plans. Maybe some of you guys have been there too. Try digging your memory. You'll probably find one at Cracker Barrel, and if you do, then definitely share it with us in the comments. So the next on our list is some Miracle Whip, and this magic spread was the key to making all your hunger vanish away in a gust of wind all the way back in 1969. Seriously, breakfast wasn't complete without this, and it became a staple of literally anything that involved mayo at all. It was a miracle-like spread that even used salads, And the reason it got so popular is because every mayo kind of tastes the same. You always have that strange tanginess with the sourness, but this one was a sweet mayo, and baby boomers grew up with it in their potato salads, their cold pasta, their sandwiches, and their pizza. It was definitely one of the most genre-defining products Kraft Heinz ever came out with, and people that were there for its time in the sun will remember that nothing really compares to the feeling of a Miracle Whip loaded mayo, bacon, lettuce, tomato sandwich. You may not be the biggest fan of main courses and savory, meaty, carb-filled dishes, so let's switch gears and talk about some boomer desserts that, in the time of the 1970s, they just could not go without. All right, let's switch gears from sweet to savory. So this next dish might not be as complex as a Hubbard squash pie, but don't let that fool you. Grandma Maggio's spaghetti sauce is a timeless classic. Let's be honest, spaghetti is pretty much the national food of America. It's the answer to all our prayers when we can't decide what to eat after a busy day. Granny knew what she was doing when she whipped up this spaghetti sauce. This rich, savory sauce was the star of many family dinners, simmered for hours to develop deep, complex flavors. Made with ripe tomatoes, garlic, and a blend of herbs, it was a sauce that brought people together around the table, and still does in many parts of the country. The recipe for this sauce likely comes from Italian-American traditions, where family recipes were passed down through generations. Now I know store-bought sauces have taken over our pastas, but there's nothing quite like homemade goodness. This one remains a classic for those who remember the labor of love that went into making it. Chili con carne is one of those timeless dishes that truly delivers rich, hearty, and with just the right kick of spice. This Tex-Mex staple combines ground beef, kidney beans, tomatoes, and a bold mix of spices like chili powder and cumin. Sometimes a dash of cinnamon or cocoa sneaks in for a little extra depth. Chili has endless interpretations. Some folks swear by a splash of beer, while others keep it strictly bean-free. But however you stir it up, chili con carne is a go-to bowl of warmth for those chilly winter days. Chili even has a colorful history. Back in the 1800s, Texas cattle drivers made chili on the trail, drying out beef and spices into blocks to rehydrate later over campfires. Some say the dish draws from Mexican roots, while others claim it's as American as a cowboy hat. And for a fun bit of trivia, Texas purists stand firm on a no-beans stance, arguing real chili con carne should stick to just meat and spices. Whether you prefer it on the milder side or loaded with spice, classic chili con carne is a crowd favorite that warms you to the core. Pair it with cornbread or some crispy tortilla chips, and you've got yourself a bowl of pure comfort that never gets old. Word chaudière, meaning a cooking pot fisherman used to prepare his fish with whatever was available. For a more local approach, you can tweak it a little with homemade bacon or smoked ham for smokiness, or fresh chives or parsley to zest things up. For an added ingredient, you can incorporate a handful of corn kernels to the mixture before the food is cooked to add on the sweet flavor. Enjoy with oyster crackers or crusty bread, and what you have yourself is a bowl of rich, sweet, and savory soup. Corn stew is easy to prepare, delicious, and it brings out those summer feelings while being eaten on the coldest days. Ham and bean stew is that thick, hearty bowl of, yes, you guessed it, comfort food made to get you through a chilly day. It's packed with smoky ham, creamy beans, and simple vegetables like carrots, onions, and celery. The key ingredient in this recipe is ham bone, because it adds such a rich flavor to it, and as it cooks, it releases all its juicy goodness into the broth. Those of you who had some leftover holiday ham will surely appreciate this simple yet delicious stew. Like so many soupy dishes, ham and bean stew has a long history in American food culture, particularly in regions such as the South and Midwest, where any piece of meat was valued. This dish was a popular staple to soldiers of the Civil War because it is cheap, energetically dense, and can be prepared in big quantities. To intensify the taste, you can pour a few tablespoons of apple cider vinegar or some thyme. Take it with cornbread to mop up all the juices, and you've got a homey, warming winter food. Ham and bean stew is the epitome of comfort food, and it's reminiscent of Grandma's kitchen. Turkey and dumpling stew is sort of a post-Christmas dish. Turkey is combined with a creamy, zesty broth and soft, light dumplings, which makes it the ultimate comfort food. It warms you from the top of your head down to your toes. The dumplings are certainly the focus here, and they get transformed into little pouches of deliciousness as they absorb the rich flavors of the broth. This stew was traditionally prepared to help recycle the leftovers from the Thanksgiving dinner, but it's really delicious and shouldn't be prepared only once a year. Dumplings have been around for centuries, appearing in various forms around the world, from Chinese dim sum to Italian gnocchi. In this version, drop biscuit dough is used, creating those light, fluffy dumplings we all know and love. You can also season the broth with more robust flavors, such as using a pinch of sage or thyme to enhance the broth flavor, or adding some colors to your broth by adding peas or carrots. Turkey and dumpling stew is a replenishing and very satisfying meal that covers all the hallmarks of a perfect winter meal. Plus, it's a good way to use up any leftover turkey. Okay, this one is a bit of a wild card, but hear me out. B&M brown bread in a can was a pantry staple for many families. It was perfect for sandwiches or toasted with butter. It was so convenient and always tasted great. Brown bread is a type of bread made with molasses or dark corn syrup. It's often associated with New England cuisine. B&M brown bread in a can was a unique offering that combined convenience with tradition. This bread was a New England classic known for its dense, sweet flavor and the soup's distinctive can packaging. The history of B&M brown bread dates back to the early 1900s when the company first introduced it as a way to provide a convenient, ready-to-eat bread option. Although it's no longer as widely available, it remains a cherished part of New England's culinary history. Corn pudding is a dish that may not have been as grand as the rest so far, but it was a simple DIY casserole that made your day. Corn pudding was made with stewed corn and thickening agents that helped give it a pudding or custard-like texture. However, it was not typically baked in a traditional casserole case. Instead, it had a custard dish that the pudding would go into and then be baked in. Now, down in the South, this was the food gospel. People just loved it all over, especially in less urban areas where corn was widely and daily consumed, particularly during times of economic uncertainty when households had to cut corners in the kitchen. Corn pudding was a cheap and easy-to-make casserole that was not too shabby. Nowadays, people like that have moved more to poaching local wildlife than taking Mother Nature's gifts, and as a result, corn pudding went extinct too. This sandwich would go great with some fresh fruit fluff salad, which was perfect for all kinds of occasions. Casual brunches, bridal showers, birthdays, and holiday gatherings all felt a little incomplete in the northern areas of America without this fruit fluff salad. It was a pretty good summer dish, and it had an assortment of fruits that worked well and bounced off of each other's textures and tastes. Stuff like a creamy lemon base supplemented with fresh strawberries or blueberries was a typical standard for a fresh fruit fluff salad, but you could also get tropical with kiwis and pineapples. A lot of things worked, and the reason it goes great with a croquet madame is because ham was usually used as a topping for this dish too, so it was a great pairing. Grasshopper pie was a bit of a hybrid because it was made with crème de cacao, whipped cream, and crème de menthe, which are definitely not your typical ingredients, but aren't really easily accessible either, and it did not need to be baked. It was a pie that treaded new flavors entirely. You wouldn't hear people use the words minty and refreshing for a pie, right? You just haven't had a grasshopper one, and in the 70s, this really got around. In the 1970s, it was one of the frontliners as far as frozen desserts were considered, and it worked even in warmer months too. The mint flavoring came from the crème de menthe, which gave it its iconic green hue too. One thing you can see in this dish is that it shows how the 70s had a preference for cooking with some style and flair. They didn't just want their dishes to taste good back then, they wanted it to look good too. Those two can stand on their own as main dishes, but what do we have for Boomer side dishes? What made its way onto the salad bars, the appetizer sections, and the hors d'oeuvres of the Boomer era? Now, butter-baked saltine crackers are the ultimate example of how a few simple ingredients can turn into an irresistible snack. This simple snack became a hit during the 1970s due to its incredibly easy preparation and delightful taste. The process involves baking plain saltine crackers with a layer of melted butter and seasoning, which transforms them into a crispy, flavorful treat. The result is a snack that's both savory and satisfying, perfect for munching straight from the tray or serving at a party. The beauty of butter-baked saltines lies in their simplicity. They're incredibly easy to make. Just brush the crackers with butter and bake them until crispy. They're a nostalgic favorite from the 70s, offering a no-fuss, flavorful treat that pairs perfectly with a variety of dips or just on their own. Beef barley stew is as old as the day is long and as filling as one meal can get, thanks to a concoction of beef, barley, and carbs like carrots and celery. Barley adds a slight chewy texture to this stew and delicate, slightly earthy flavor. It's one of those stews that tastes like it's been cooking for hours, because it has, with flavors that meld together into pure comfort. Scottish beef barley stew can be traced back into the past when barley was used in dishes meant to fill many, since it was relatively cheap to acquire. Barley is possibly one of the earliest cultivated cereals for over 1,000 years, and people love it in their food and beer. Some tips for this beef barley stew recipe include taking the beef through the browning process for more tenderness. Plus, cooking on low heat creates a very tasty broth. Sprinkle some fresh parsley, and that is all. You can have it with some bread to help mop every drop of the soup off the plate. This beef barley stew is perfect. Warm, filling, and packed with just enough of a hearty punch for a cold winter's night. It's like comfort food for the soul. So Grandma's cookbook didn't only come in handy to satisfy the sweet tooth, her casseroles were to die for too, and the ground beef casserole was comfort food at its finest. Remember when this baked goodness was the ultimate weeknight meal? It combined ground beef with vegetables topped with a crispy layer of cheese or breadcrumbs, and if you begged enough, Granny used to go light with the carrots. This casserole was a go-to for busy weeknights and family gatherings alike. The origins of this dish can be traced back to the 1950s, when casseroles became a popular way to feed a crowd on a budget. Grandma's version was particularly beloved for its rich flavor and the way it brought the whole family together around the dinner table. Sadly, it's fallen out of favor, but it's never too late to give Grandma a call and ask her to share that secret recipe. The King Ranch chicken, on the bright side, was beloved by children and adults alike. There is no questioning why the dish was popular amongst people, as one of the main ingredients was tortilla chips. Now we know how liked chips are in the States. Make it part of a food item, and you have a potential fan favorite on the dinner table. It helped that making the King Ranch chicken was a quick and easy process. All you had to do was have slices of boneless chicken layered on tortilla chips, then add a layer of cheese and creamy tomato sauce. With just a few simple steps, your King Ranch chicken was ready. People presumed this casserole to be more of an appetizer snack rather than a dinner item, but that did not stop people from having their fair share of cheesy tortillas throughout dinner time. Eventually, modern nachos recipes replaced the place of King Ranch chicken on dinner tables, causing it to become a forgotten gem. Next on our list is Grandma McAndrews's Irish soda bread. Hear me out, this bread didn't actually have any soda pop. Yeah, steer clear of Coca-Cola and Dr. Pepper's. The only soda you need here is baking soda. Made with just a few ingredients, flour, baking soda, buttermilk, and a touch of salt, it's a bread that's as straightforward as it is delicious. Irish soda bread has its origins in Ireland, where baking soda was used as a leavening agent instead of yeast. Grandma McAndrew's version was known for its slightly tangy flavor and crusty exterior, making it perfect for sopping up stews or enjoying with a pat of butter. This one looks just as good as it tastes. The classic cross on top of Irish soda bread symbolizes the Christian cross. It's a beautiful tradition that adds a touch of history to this delicious bread. Plus, Irish soda bread is incredibly versatile. Beyond the classic loaf, you can shape it into scones, muffins, or even pancakes. Okay, brace yourselves. We're talking about Heinz kidney soup. Now, I know what you're thinking. Kidney beans? But trust me, this wasn't your average bean soup. It was thick, hearty, and packed with flavor. It was a staple in many households, and I'm honestly surprised it's no longer on the shelves. Kidney beans are a good source of protein and fiber. They're also versatile ingredients that can be used in a variety of dishes. The soup was part of Heinz's effort to offer a variety of options beyond their famous tomato soup. While it may not have been as popular as some of their other offerings, it was appreciated by those who enjoyed its distinctive flavor. It's no longer available, but it remains a notable part of Heinz's soup history. Sheepherder's stew is a hearty, no-frills dish with its roots in the lives of Basque herders working in the rugged American West. Made with lamb or mutton, potatoes, onions, and often some peas or green beans, it's a stew that's as rustic as it comes. The simplicity of ingredients made it perfect for cooking over a campfire out on the open range, offering a warm and filling meal to fuel those long, chilly days spent with the flock. Lamb lends the stew a deep, earthy flavor, while the vegetables bring sweetness and depth, creating a dish that's straightforward but utterly comforting. Here's a fun tidbit. Basque sheepherders typically used a single pot for all their cooking, making stews like this a practical and satisfying choice. They'd throw in whatever ingredients they had at the moment, letting everything simmer together for a meal that was both home-style and efficient. For an added layer of flavor true to tradition, try a splash of red wine or a pinch of rosemary, or even a handful of barley for extra heartiness. Pair it with some bread or biscuits, and sheepherder's stew becomes the ultimate one-pot wonder, perfect for chilly evenings when you crave something simple, rustic, and warming. It's a little taste of history in every spoonful, just waiting to cozy up your evening. Speaking of strange cookies, who says cookies have to be sweet? Great-grandma's sour cream drop cookies were a delightful surprise. Now, I know sour cream is the last ingredient that comes to mind when you think of cookies, but this unusual addition made our childhoods 1,000 times more delicious. These cookies were a blend of soft and tangy, thanks to the addition of sour cream. Sour cream was a popular ingredient in baking during the early 20th century, adding moisture and a slight tang to cookies and cakes. These must be one of the simplest forms of cookies. As all baking books will tell you, they are also known as drop cookies. They are so called as the cookie dough is so soft that it drops off the spoon and onto the baking sheet. This cookie was often enjoyed with powdered sugar or a glaze to trick kids into thinking they were in for something sweet. These sour cream cookies prove that sometimes the most surprising flavors can be found in the most unexpected places. Hungarian goulash, despite its name, is not a soup, but rather a stew with a lot of punch because of its secret ingredient, paprika. This rustic dish combines tender chunks of beef, onions, bell peppers, and potatoes, all cooked in a rich, spiced broth that's as colorful as it is flavorful. Hungarian goulash is thicker than soup but finer than the real stew, hence can be referred to as comfort food, not being too dense but still hearty. This classic dish has been around since the 9th century, originally cooked by Hungarian herdsmen over open fires. Fun fact, real Hungarian goulash mainly uses Hungarian paprika, which provides the dish the smoky sweet flavor and the bright red hue. For it to have that traditional feel, it should be served with either egg noodles or dumplings to accompany the soup. For a richer taste, you could sprinkle caraway seeds or a little sour cream on top. Hungarian goulash is more than just a meal. It's a taste of history, warmth, and old-world charm that's perfect for a cold winter's night. This is definitely a stew that will make you feel like you are in Hungary with every spoonful. Elk roast was all the rage for Native American tribes. Elk is native to North America and parts of Asia, and people have relied on it as a food source for centuries. You know, back when cattle weren't common in the States. This roast was a favorite in regions where elk was abundant, and its sacred recipe was passed down from generation to generation. So, why was it such a hit back in the day? Well, apart from the tribe's sacred connections to the animal which made it a favorite, it was pretty easy to make too. It was often slow-cooked over hot coals. Think of it as modern-day barbecue, just without all the fancy grills and tools. Elk meat was replaced by more readily available options like beef and pork. It's a shame, really, because elk roast can be a delicious and healthy meal. Remember stuffed celery sticks? These crunchy, refreshing snacks were a hit at cocktail parties and gatherings. The concept was simple. Celery sticks filled with a creamy mixture of cheese, peanut butter, or even pimento spread. Sometimes they were topped with chopped nuts or olives for an extra punch of flavor. These sticks were not only delicious, but also offered a satisfying crunch, making them a great contrast to other softer finger foods. Today, they've largely been replaced by more elaborate appetizers, but stuffed celery sticks still hold a special place in the hearts of those who grew up snacking on them. Plus, they were a sneaky way to get some veggies into your diet. It's a win-win when appetizers are not only finger-licking good but also healthy. What more can you ask for? Tuna salad made a fresh comeback, which helped extend its shelf life in the American homemade breakfast or lunch scene. The tuna salad everyone was already pretty accustomed to was reconstructed, this time with seasonal and tropical fruits like apples or cranberries and served in fresh pita sliced in half. Not only was this really healthy, but it was also intensely high in protein and carbs, so it helped you build that all-important muscle while keeping you full until a suitable time in the evening. Cannot give in to those post-meal munchie cravings, right? Tuna salad was great served as is, but some people would go a step further by baking it for a while too. So grandmas really said, "Revolution!" with this next one, because Hungarian nut rolls redefined what pastries could be. These delicious pastries were filled with a sweet nut mixture and rolled into a spiral shape, then baked until golden brown. Hungarian nut rolls have their origins in Eastern European baking traditions, where they were often made for special occasions and holidays. Word on the street says some grandma in Europe wasn't actually aiming for Hungarian nut rolls. She was, believe it or not, trying to make cinnamon rolls. But, as fate would have it, she grabbed the wrong jar, walnuts instead of cinnamon. Thank God for this beautiful mishap. The recipe has been passed down through generations, with each family adding their own twist. These rolls may not be as common today, but they still hold a special place in the hearts of those who grew up with them. All right, let's talk about this Campbell's Homestyle Chicken Noodle Soup. This was a vegetarian's dream come true. It was creamy, flavorful, and packed with protein with a combination of white beans, rice, and spinach. Campbell's. This particular variety gained popularity in many states, especially in the Midwest, where hearty soups are a staple in comfort food cuisine. One of the most memorable aspects of Campbell's Homestyle Chicken Noodle Soup was its iconic advertising campaign. The ads featured the chunky soup label prominently and were often endorsed by celebrity athletes like NFL stars. Interestingly, Campbell's even made a point to highlight the homemade quality of the soup in their marketing, suggesting that it was made with the same care and attention as if it were prepared in a family kitchen. Chicken noodle soup has a long history as a go-to comfort food, and Campbell's Homestyle version aimed to take that tradition to the next level. Despite its popularity, this version eventually fell off the shelves. Dilled beef and cabbage stew is the ultimate in comfort food, adding a Scandinavian touch with the fresh, earthy flavor of dill. This hearty dish brings together tender beef chunks, cabbage, carrots, and potatoes, all uplifted by dill's herbaceous brightness. It's surprisingly refreshing for a winter stew, just right when you want something lighter than heavy gravies or sauces. Fun fact: cabbage is not just affordable but packed with vitamins C, K, and fiber, making it one of the healthiest veggies around. This recipe has its roots in Eastern European and Scandinavian kitchens, where cabbage was a winter staple, and Grandma knew it was a meal you could easily whip up from simple ingredients, yet still serve up a satisfying, flavorful dinner. For a little extra zing, add a splash of vinegar or a dollop of sour cream. Serve it with rye bread or boiled potatoes to soak up every drop of that tangy, herby broth. Cozy yet unique, this dilled beef and cabbage stew deserves a comeback as a winter classic. Speaking of adding butter to the mix and elevating the dish, cheese has a pretty similar effect when you mix it with some scrambled eggs. It was one of the dreamiest breakfasts you could wake up to. The scent of freshly scrambled eggs forming a clear road that guided you to the kitchen, with each step taken increasing that early morning appetite. Once you sit, you are blessed with the glorious glow of cheese mixed with shining yolk and brilliant egg whites, scrambled to complete perfection mixed in with Grandma's special seasonings. That usually just meant a dash of paprika and oregano here and there. What was truly special, though, is how Grandma would manage to melt the cheese into the egg without compromising on how scrambled it was, which is an art lost to them now. Grandma's date nut bread was the best way to sneak nutrition into a sweet treat. Come on, grandmothers didn't just want us to fill our tummies with sugar, they wanted to make sure we were getting those nutrients in too, and that was pretty much the origin of the date nut bread. This moist and flavorful bread is a classic for a reason. Grandma's date nut bread was a staple in our household. It was perfect for breakfast, a snack, or even dessert. Packed with chopped dates and crunchy nuts, it had just the right amount of protein, fibers, and iron. It was often enjoyed with a smear of butter or cream cheese, adding to its indulgent appeal. Though it may not be as commonly made today, Grandma's date nut bread is a nostalgic reminder of simpler times and the joy of homemade treats. Ah, the classic Franco-American spaghetti and meatballs. Did you know Franco-American spaghetti and meatballs was one of the first canned pasta meals to bring a taste of Italy to busy American families in the 1930s? I'm not sure why they discontinued this, but it's a major loss for the canned soup aisle. This was a childhood staple for so many of us. The sweet tomato sauce, the tender meatballs, and the perfectly cooked spaghetti. It was comfort food perfection in a can. Franco-American was known for its ready-to-eat meals, and this particular offering was a favorite among those who wanted a taste of Italian food without the hassle of cooking. While spaghetti and meatballs are often associated with Italian cuisine, the dish actually originated in Naples, Italy. Although it's no longer available, it was a popular choice for families looking for a convenient meal. Next on the table, we have garlic knots. The 1970s were all about extravagant dinner parties and quirky appetizers. This was the era when finger foods became a must-have at gatherings, and hosts loved getting creative with their presentations. That's when this delicious treat came to life. These tasty little morsels were a staple at pizzerias and Italian restaurants, often served as a starter or side dish. Made from pizza dough tied into a knot, these bites were generously coated in garlic butter and sprinkled with herbs. The result? A soft, pillowy delight with a burst of garlicky flavor. Garlic knots were perfect for dipping in marinara sauce, making them a versatile and addictive snack. The only downside? Once you started eating, it was so easy to lose count and keep going, as each bite was just too irresistible to stop at just one. While they haven't completely disappeared, they've become less common as more trendy appetizers have taken the spotlight. Croque madames involve layers of melted cheese smothered between freshly baked, crisp white bread. And to top it all off, there's an intense, smoky flavor from the ham. The best part about it is that it takes minutes to make, and it was one of the more fancy dishes that people would create when they were feeling like having a bit of an extravagant dinner. Everyone deserves to treat themselves sometimes, but for home chefs, especially grandparents, the biggest treat is often just seeing everyone eat up every last bite of what they've made. That was never a problem if croque madames were the dish being served, because nobody could resist this classic American sandwich that did more than its fair share of justice to ham. Poached or lightly fried eggs as a topping also made it work a lot better. And by the way, they are called croque madames because the poached eggs seem to resemble women's luxury hats in the 90s. Pork and sauerkraut stew is such a great meal during winter since it consists of succulent pork, pride of sour sauerkraut, and starchy potatoes cooked in a savory and mildly sour soup. It's a Central European comfort food favorite, especially among German and Eastern European communities who believe sauerkraut brings good luck for the new year. This stew is one of the best examples of how sweet and salty interact. Thus, sauerkraut is not only for hot dogs, but also fermented, packed with probiotics, which are beneficial for intestinal health. Fun fact, people used to soak cabbage to ferment so that it can last right through the winter period. If you want to get proper flavors in your pork and sauerkraut stew, try to use pork shoulder or sausage. In some cases, other ingredients such as apples or even beer are put in to tone down the strong tastes and add a sweet accent. Accompany with crusty rye bread for a proper meal that fills your belly and helps to warm you up. pork and sauerkraut stew is a wintertime dish that is hearty, sour, and somewhat reminiscent of those forgotten dishes that should not be kept forgotten. Next up is smoked fish dip. Smoked fish, like mullet, was a staple in Florida's coastal communities due to the abundance of fish and the preservation methods available. Smoked fish dip evolved as a way to enjoy this preserved fish in a creamy, flavorful dip, making it a popular choice at southern gatherings and seafood festivals. This smoky dip was a popular appetizer at parties, especially in coastal regions. Made with smoked fish, cream cheese, and a blend of herbs and spices, it offered a rich and flavorful experience. The dip was usually served with crackers, bread, or vegetable sticks, making it a versatile addition to any spread. The smoky flavor of the fish paired perfectly with the creamy base, creating a dip that was both indulgent and satisfying. While smoked fish dip is still enjoyed in some circles, it's not as common as it once was. However, it remains a delicious throwback to the flavors of the past. Now let's go back to the roots with this next one. Grandma's Sweet Hubbard Squash Custard Pie was a unique twist on traditional pumpkin pie, featuring the sweet and nutty flavor of Hubbard squash instead. Whether inspired by a traditional farm recipe or a hearty harvest meal, this pie began as a humble yet beloved dish in early American kitchens. It combined the rich, nutty flavor of Hubbard squash with the creamy sweetness of custard, creating a tradition that warmed family tables for generations. It was a favorite during the fall season. Hubbard squash was a popular ingredient in many home kitchens due to its versatility and natural sweetness. Grandma's pie was a seasonal treat, often served during holiday dinners and special occasions. Grandmothers were truly ahead of their time with this one. So Progresso Hearty Tomato Soup was a thicker, more substantial version of the classic tomato soup. Progresso, known for its wide variety of soups, created this version to offer a richer, more satisfying tomato soup experience. Tomato soup was originally considered a luxury item when it was first introduced to the United States. It wasn't until the late 19th century that it became more widely available. This soup featured tomato flavor with a thicker, creamier texture compared to standard tomato soups. It was a favorite for those who wanted a more filling option without sacrificing the comforting taste of tomato soup. This one has fallen off the shelves, but tomato soup lovers still daydream about it. So Cobb salad was not actually made by a grandmother on the brink of innovation, but by Bob Cobb, who owned the famous chain of Brown Derby restaurants in LA and Hollywood, California. He made the chopped salad in 1937 and knew that America needed a salad with enough of the familiar stuff it was used to and enough of the healthy things it desperately needed. While they cannot take the credit for making it, grandmas all over the nation still rejoiced in delight when this fantastic dish did hit tables and restaurants all over. They finally had an easy, cheap, and quick way to get some much-needed nutrition into the family diet. All a Cobb salad takes is some boiled eggs, fried tomatoes, chicken, bacon, and other ingredients with a lettuce topping. You might think, why not throw in some spinach or kale, but we will get to some salads that use those too. For this one, lettuce worked the best with the textures of the meat that were in there. Creamed chicken stew with vegetables is one of those comforting dishes that is perfect for the colder months, and this recipe couldn't be easier to make. Packed with tender chicken, carrots, peas, and potatoes, and wrapped in a creamy, luscious broth. This stew makes you feel like you are being hugged with comfort on a cold day. It's simple but full of flavor, and Grandma knew it was perfect for feeding a crowd on a chilly night. This dish has roots in the traditional chicken pot pie filling, but it skips the crust to focus on that creamy goodness. Fun fact: cream-based stews such as this one became popular in America in the early part of the 20th century due to changing availability of dairy products. To make it even richer, you may add a spoon of white wine or manage freshly chopped parsley or dill. Enjoy it with biscuits, and you'll have a truly delicious, warm stew to enjoy whilst curled up by the fire. Creamed chicken stew with vegetables. This is probably a perfect recipe for winter since it will remind you of your childhood. Now, let's talk about Amy's Tuscan Bean and Rice Soup. Amy's is renowned for its organic and natural products, and this soup was no exception. This was a vegetarian's dream come true. It was creamy, flavorful, and packed with protein. And let's not forget that this soup was organic, so you could feel good about eating it. Tuscan cuisine is known for its simplicity and use of fresh ingredients. Bean soups, like this one, are a classic part of the Tuscan diet. Amy's commitment to using high-quality organic ingredients made this soup a favorite among health-conscious eaters. The Tuscan bean and rice soup was a perfect example of how canned soups could be both delicious and nutritious. It was all the rage for fitness freaks, and they still call for a comeback. In the 70s, dips were the star of the show, and hot cheesy crab dip was no exception. It was a total crowd pleaser that everyone raved about. Think of a warm, gooey blend of cream cheese, crab meat, and a medley of spices, all melted together into a dip that was pure heaven. Served with crackers or slices of crusty bread, this dip was a must-have at 1970s parties, especially near coastal areas where fresh crab was abundant. The combination of tender crab meat and rich cheese made it an irresistible treat that kept partygoers coming back for more. Now, it's rare to find this dip at modern gatherings, but it remains a delicious reminder of the luxurious flavors of the past. So, if you ever get the chance, give this retro dip a whirl. You won't regret it. Cabbage roll stew is a variation of the stuffed cabbage rolls, but easier to prepare because it's a one-pot dish. To make it, you take ground beef or pork, rice, tomatoes, and cabbages, and cook them in a rich broth that is slightly sour. Cabbage rolls without having to roll a cabbage. In other words, a way to get that yummy, intense flavor with less effort. The preparation of the cabbage rolls is maybe several centuries old, and it is a kitchen staple of the people of Southeastern Europe. Fun fact, cabbage rolls were traditionally served at celebrations, symbolizing prosperity and abundance. This stew variation is easier to make, saving you time without sacrificing flavor. Sprinkle a tiny bit of paprika or bay leaf to make it tastier, and serve it with bread to capture all the tomato broth. This cabbage roll stew can warm your bones as no other stew can. Without the complexities of cabbage rolls, it's cozy, filling, and absolutely delicious, a taste of the old world in a modern, lazy day dish. So, this creamy roasted chicken with herb dumpling soup was a total game changer. I mean, chicken soup just got a major upgrade. The broth was rich and flavorful, and those herb dumplings were the perfect addition. Chicken soup has been used as a remedy for colds and flu for centuries. Some believe it has medicinal properties, although the science is still debated. So, why did creamy roasted chicken with herb dumpling soup disappear from our shelves? Well, shifting consumer tastes and a focus on lighter, healthier options meant this rich, creamy classic just couldn't keep up. Plus, Campbell's had to streamline their lineup to make room for new favorites. This soup was known for its hearty and filling nature, making it a popular choice for families looking for a quick and satisfying meal, and it's missed dearly. Ah, crêpes Suzette! Yeah, these were just as fancy as they sound. This elegant dish was like the fancy cousin who always steals the show at family gatherings. Thin, delicate crepes drenched in a buttery orange sauce, then flambéed tableside. What's not to savor? From its name alone, you'd guess crêpes Suzette is a French delicacy, but this finger food quickly made its way to parties around the globe. Crêpes Suzette was the ultimate in sophistication and pizzazz, often making an appearance at upscale restaurants or special celebrations. The flambé technique, where the sauce was set on fire, really set this one apart from all other finger foods on the table. However, this decadent dessert has fallen out of favor, possibly because of the decline in tableside flambé performances. But let's not forget the joy of watching a waiter set your dessert on fire. Here's another one that takes hearty inspirations from our Mexican neighbors. Enchiladas casseroles were the talk of the town when they first showed up. See some people randomly combining foods that work just fine. Solo are not mad scientists. They are real visionaries, and there is a tunnel with a light at the end only they can see. In this case, the luminescence came from the light bulb that went off in people's heads when they thought two things. Why not use layered tortillas with enchiladas and other vegetables? Kick it up a notch with a sauce that actually worked in casseroles paired with cheesy meat, and you had a winner. Every winner must let go of their championship belt someday, and these were no exception. Aspics are definitely something that provided that much needed sugar rush to get through the explosive decade that was the 1990s, where it felt like the entire world was changing every Tuesday. Artistically, food-wise, and economically, it was a very volatile time. If there was any sense of calm, it was in dishes like this, which leaned into the convenient and easy nature of most of the recipes that became mainstay trends of the decade. People wanted easy food that didn't break their back to make, and aspics worked both as a personal one-on-one dessert and at a buffet-style gathering. Next, let's talk about cheese straws. No, not the ones you sip your drink with. Cheese straws were a traditional food of England and the southern United States. These baked strips of cheesy dough were a party favorite. Made from a simple mixture of flour, butter, and cheddar cheese, they were twisted into straw-like shapes and baked to perfection. The result? A crunchy, savory snack that pairs perfectly with a cocktail or a glass of wine. And don't get me started on how easy they were to just grab and go. Cheese straws perfectly combined simplicity with sophistication and were ideal for any get-together, from casual parties to more upscale gatherings. Well, all good things come to an end, and sadly, cheese fingers were abandoned after living their days out in the 70s. Before theater popcorn became a favorite, Grandma's caramel popcorn balls were all we had. And the best part? They didn't cost a fortune. These sweet, sticky treats were a favorite for movie nights and holiday parties. Made with freshly popped popcorn coated in a rich caramel sauce, they were as fun to make as they were to eat. Caramel popcorn balls became popular in the mid-20th century as a playful snack. Of course, Grandma's take things to new heights, so her version was shaped into balls and sometimes rolled in additional toppings like nuts or sprinkles. These treats were a hit with kids and adults alike. While they might not be as common today, they still bring a smile to anyone who remembers the fun of making and enjoying them. There's nothing quite like a slice of homemade blueberry pie, especially when it's made with Grandma's secret recipe. Yeah, Grandma's classic blueberry pie used to be the life of the party at Thanksgiving. But this dessert wasn't just a seasonal favorite for fall, it was also the star of summer dessert tables and a favorite way to showcase those juicy, plump blueberries. Grandma's version featured a flaky, buttery crust and a filling bursting with blueberries, making it like taking a bite of summer itself. This pie dates back to colonial America, where blueberries were abundant and used in a variety of dishes. The recipe we're talking about today was a hit in Grandma's kitchen, often made from scratch with fresh, local blueberries picked during the height of summer. It's no wonder this pie vanished from many tables. It's not easy to find blueberries at their peak of ripeness these days. If you love this video as much as we love making it, give it a like, share a childhood memory in the comments, and hit subscribe to stay connected.